Now I'd like to talk about how you can apply filters to audio, mess with the EQ with audio, which has to do with the balance of loud sounds and quiet sounds. We'll talk a little bit about keyframing audio, in particular the gain of audio, or basically any effect that you would add to audio can be keyframed. And so let's start off with talking about how you can apply gain to audio. And we've got a clip here that's all still mixed, squished together with video and audio all in one, and that's fine. And what we can do is go over here and click on the effects pane. You can see you got all these other different panes, and I imagine that you've played with some of these already, but it's definitely good to see all the different options you have in Final Cut X, including some pre-created effects and animations that you can mess with. But one of the main ones you'll probably be using pretty often is this effects pane. And if you look down through here, you can see we got them sorted into video effects and different types of effects, and these are all groups of effects. This is not just, there's not just one looks effect, there's a whole bunch. So these are like folders that are holding all these different effects together. And any one that you want to apply, you can just click and drag onto a clip, or if the clip is already highlighted, you can just double click it and it will apply. We want to go down to audio, and you can see there's lots, if you see this little slider here, lots and lots and lots of different effects to look through. And so you might be thinking, like, how am I gonna find gain in this whole mess of effects? And you can actually, since Final Cut knows it's got a lot of effects options, you could type gain in, and you'll see that you have a couple of different gains to choose from. Or you can, if you want to find it by yourself, since these are broken up into categories, I think it's pretty close to the levels one here. Let's scroll through here. There's gain right there. So as I said, probably the most obvious way to apply it is to click and drag it on. But if you got the clip selected, you can also just double click it. And you can confirm that it's applied. You know, one of the things that's kind of maddening in editors is when you think you're doing something but you're not sure. If you have the clip selected and you go into the inspector here and click on audio, under effects you should see gain here. It might just be minimized like this. And so that's a clue that you've got that applied, and you can apply it multiple times if you wanted to. And if you don't know what you're doing, if you're not sure if you're applying this effect or not, you might end up doing that. So just select the clip, and if it's an audio effect, you can click on audio, and then when you apply it, you should see it added here. If it's a video effect, you should see it added to the list of effects. So that's one way you can tell that stuff is actually being added, and then modify it. And so we can click the little disclosure triangle and look at all of our different options here for things that we can do. And here's, you know, the main one that you'd probably want to mess with, which is actually boosting the gain. And maybe I should explain gain. Well, gain is a way to increase your audio levels above and beyond the maximum of what Final Cut will allow you to do in the timeline. It gives you plus 12 decibels is the most it can do here in the timeline. So if you need more than that, you can apply gain, and then you can see you can crank it up another 24 that way, and that's gonna get pretty loud, right? And generally, if you're applying gain, it's because something wasn't recorded right for whatever reason. So it's you know, a little bit of a sad sad day when you have to apply gain to audio. But there are certainly times where it's necessary, and you can get away with a little bit of gain before it starts to get to the point where it sounds kind of like hissy and distorted and not good. Another thing you can do with gain, and basically any parameter in Final Cut X that can be changed over time, is you can keyframe it. So if there were just one portion that you wanted to, you know, make either audio really loud at one point and bring it back down, you can use keyframes. And keyframes are a little bit of a complicated business. They come from the animation world, where if you can imagine, you've got professional animators who are trying to crank out movies and cartoons as fast as they can. And so what they would do is they would draw the key frames of a certain character's animation, and then in betweeners were other animators who would just draw the pictures in between. So if it was like Mickey Mouse putting his arm up in the air, there'd be like one keyframe would be his arm down low, and the other keyframe would be his arm up high. Those would be the keyframes, and then other animators would come in and draw in between and just basically even out, spread that motion out evenly between those two keyframes. So that's where we kind of get the idea. And so we use keyframes to change different parameters over time. And anytime you see this plus in a square, that's Final Cut's way of saying, well, you could keyframe this if you want. You could make it change over time. Now, before we get into keyframing, it's important to be able to see what we're doing, as I was talking about a little bit earlier. So if we right-click on our segment in the timeline and say Show Audio Animation, now you can see gain has popped up because this is something that we can keyframe over time. It's one of our effects. And now if I go in and let's say I want the audio to start to change here, I can go into gain, I can hit plus, and you can see it adds a keyframe right here. Then I move forward a little bit, add another keyframe, and now we have these two keyframes. Now I haven't changed anything between the two of them, so you wouldn't notice anything happening here. For keyframes to really work, they have to have different settings between them. All right, so this is sort of like having Mickey Mouse's arm just up the whole time. And which in some cases you might want. You might want the audio level to rise up and stay for a while and then come back down, in which case these keyframes would sort of be communicating that we don't want nothing to change between these two. But I want things to change between these two. So how do I go and modify one of those keyframes? Well, Final Cut makes it fairly easy for you. Obviously you can go click on them that way too. But Final Cut makes it fairly easy for you by giving you these little arrows next to the keyframe indicator, and these allow you to jump from one keyframe to the next to make sure you're right on it where you want to be. Because if you're slightly off, you could end up adding another keyframe or not modifying the keyframe appropriately, and it could be a mess. So we're going to change that one down to -15. Skip forward to this one, and we're going to make that -77. And you can see the audio actually changing here in the waveform as I adjust that. So there is kind of a nice little bit of a delay there, but there is kind of some nice confirmation of what the actual audio levels are looking like when we do that, as long as you have the audio waveform selected there. So if we go back, that's -15. That's well, that's not a huge change. Let's change that down. -15 to -59. So between these two, the audio would get quieter and quieter and quieter until it got to -59, and then it would just stay there until another keyframe, if we added another keyframe and changed it. So the world of keyframes is fairly complicated. Audio is actually one good way to kind of introduce yourself to keyframes, because it's fairly simple to see and understand what's going on. If you want to delete keyframes, you have a couple ways to do it. You can click on it and hit delete. You can also, here in the inspector, use the arrow to get right on the keyframe and hit the X, and that gets rid of the keyframe too. So that is how you can apply an audio effect to a clip in Final Cut X, and then also change it over time by using the keyframe editor. You can also have Final Cut go through and analyze your audio to try and get the levels set where they should be. And generally, I'm comfortable enough with that I have Final Cut do it right when it brings my video in here in the import window, analyze and fix audio problems. But if you had that turned off and you wanted to go ahead and change them manually or only adjust them when you specifically wanted to, you can click on the clip. I'm going to right click and hide audio animation just to streamline things a little bit there. And then you can go to audio And you can see my problems have been, whatever problems there were, have been resolved already. But if they weren't, you can click on that uh, triangle and see some options for changing your audio levels, for adjusting uniformity. So how even are the levels, or do they vary up and down a significant amount? Do you want to try and remove background noise, or if you've got hum issues? So there are a ton of potential issues that you could have with audio, and so Final Cut X has built in a couple of things to try and help you remove those, because they do happen a fair amount. It is interesting here that Final Cut actually has a picture of an outlet here, and that's because sometimes in audio we will get a hum, and that is because of electrical issues. For example, our electrical system in the US will create a 60 hertz hum sometimes, or here we got a 50 hertz, or actually it's set right to 60 hertz, and that just has to do with our alternating current. If you run an audio cable right next to an extension cord, for example, for a long time, from what I understand, that alternating current can interfere with your audio and give you a sort of humming sound, which is a common problem. So common, in fact, that they just create a default removal for that. Also, if you wanted to mess with audio EQ yourself, you can click on this sort of sliders window here, and this gives you the option for graphic equalizer. Graphic meaning we can see it, and equalizer meaning our ability to move audio levels along certain tones or certain frequencies within our audio. So for example, this is the lower end and the higher end, and our speaking voice tends to be kind of here in the middle range. And so if you found that maybe there was a particular sound, like irritating sound, and it was, maybe there's a refrigerator running in the background. Okay, if you could isolate that refrigerator was at this lower sound, you could drop that down and really reduce that particular part of the audio spectrum, so that it was much quieter and therefore not competing with the spoken word part of your audio so much. Or if you just wanted to mess with sound, create more of a bassy sound or something with your audio, you could do that. So maybe you've seen these on stereos and I don't know, in your car or something like that. You can go and boost the bass or boost the treble, that kind of thing. And so that's where you can do that here in Final Cut X. And it's definitely handy to know where that is. And you got other options here too. If you want to be more specific, you can go to 31 bands and really isolate a very specific area of sound. And so sometimes that is really handy if you've got an audio problem that you're trying to sort out. As long as it's in a pretty narrow sound range, like narrow tone, it can be pretty easy to get rid of that. Or maybe you just want to create a cool effect, a little bit more bassy sound or something, you can do that. So that's how you can make some changes to your audio in Final Cut X.